So, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So, we're here to talk about the Black Manifesto, um, and that year, 1969, when so many things are happening in our country. So, you were here that day when James Forman interrupted worship on May 4th,
Yes.
and stood on those steps over there on the chancel of the Riverside Church
Yes.
and recited his Black Manifesto. Can you sort of walk us through what that Sunday was like for you? I think you said you came late that day.
Yes, I did. And of course, I didn't know a lot of people here. I sat there being quiet and respectful when I saw this young man making pronouncements from the steps, somewhere along the steps. And he was very loud. It sounded strident. And he was speaking rapidly.
Ah.
Then I noticed people standing and gasping and preening back here, looking around to see what was going on. I was totally surprised. I had no inkling that anything like this was afoot here at the church on that Sunday. I was just trying to be a good churchgoer. And I think even I was thinking, what is this? Why would someone interrupt a church service?
We, the Black people, assembled in Detroit, Michigan for the National Black Economic Development Conference. Stop! It is not my intention to interrupt this service this morning. We are demanding $500 million from the Christian white churches and Jewish synagogues. But it is not enough to say that a black man is on top. He must be committed to building the new society, to taking the wealth away from the rich people, such as General Motors, Ford, Chrysler, and all the other rich white exploiters and racists who run this world.
So then he seemed to get drowned out. Couldn't hear very well. He seemed to be blaming or accusing the church, not Riverside in particular, but the churches in general and other religious institutions for the problems that Black people were having in this country. And it related to a legacy of slavery. I understood that much.
And finally, the manager or the assistant manager or the announcer came on to explain what had happened at the morning service at Riverside. James Forman, formerly SNCC president, all the credentials they could give him, walked into Riverside Church during worship, his white robes flying, walked up into the chancel and wanted to speak from the center of the chancel about what he called the Black Manifesto. Ernest Campbell, then the senior preaching minister, felt this was an embarrassment. He wouldn't take over, he wouldn't take to this. And so he looked over to the other clergy on the other side by the lectern, and I guess he said, let's get out of here. And so they went down to the center of the chancel and walked down the middle aisle and left. So that was the front page of the New York Times the next morning. These 4 white clergy at Riverside Church walking out on James Forman. And James stayed there and talked about the Black Manifesto. So we met, I think, the next day, Monday, as a staff to go over what was happening. And Ernest Campbell hadn't really put it together yet, because there's a lot to unpackage on that occasion. Newspaper coverage, phone calls, and all that went with it. And so I think, I'm not sure of the timing though, but in the course of that week, I think I suggested to him, he had to make a response by the next Sunday. James Forman would return to hear what he had to say about reparations, the manifesto. And said, you should tell the congregation vis-a-vis the radio station what you're going to tell James Forman, or at least let him in on what's going on. And the president of the National Council of Churches, Ed Espy, his office was there, and they took it on and took Campbell on and said, if this thing, if you make the wrong move here, all the mainline churches in America, white churches, will, accuse Riverside. So they had to walk a fine line to that next Sunday, because after Campbell's sermon, then we had a meeting in the assembly hall where everybody was there. National Council of Churches people, other denominational leaders, UCC, to express themselves and to see what the next move would be. So all those things happened. And, at one point, the church had become a little bit divided at that time. The old-timers were conservative, and they didn't think we needed a black Christian caucus. Why would you call it a caucus? It's not a political place. So they wanted us to change the name. No, we'd make our own names, But we were not appreciated. And when Campbell, that week before the return of Forman, he did meet with the caucus to get our opinion, and we talked about what we thought was there. The people were divided in the caucus. We're not a monolithic group of people, and some thought, well, we're talking about reparations. We should talk, but we had no one had really given a lot of thought to reparations. We're still in civil rights, not reparations. And so then he made his response that morning, and then that afternoon we had an assembly hall full of people, pros and cons, etc. Basically, how dare he, And he came to Riverside. We were integrated, and we're up here in Morningside Heights. Why didn't he go to St. Patrick or say John the Divine? No, he went to Riverside, and for good reasons. So that's what happened, and it took a long time for the black members and even white members to resonate to what reparations was all about. But the Black Manifesto set the tone and gave us something to think about.